Snow falls softly over a lonely road at dawn. A police truck crawls through the mist, its headlights slicing the cold gray air. Inside, a tired officer grips the wheel, his breath fogging the glass, while beside him, a German shepherd lifts its head, sensing something unseen. In the distance, an old house stands silent, smoke rising faintly from its chimney, as if waiting for someone brave enough to knock. This is where their paths will cross. A man searching for peace, a child lost to silence, and a secret buried beneath the snow. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments below, and may your day be gentle, warm, and filled with quiet miracles. The first snow of October drifted softly over Willow Creek, a quiet mountain town wrapped in silence and evergreen pines. The air smelled faintly of sap and iron, sharp and clean. The sun was only a dim disk above the frosted ridges, its light bending through mist like a tired halo. Officer Grant Mercer guided his patrol truck down the lonely road that cut through the woods, a man who had long learned to live with ghosts. Grant was 48, broad-shouldered but slightly stooped, his uniform fitting him with the comfort of habit rather than pride. His hair had once been dark, now streaked with gray that caught the morning light like threads of silver. His face was marked by years of sun and loss, creases around the eyes that no laughter had deepened in a long time. 10 winters had passed since his wife and little girl died in a car crash on this same road, and though time had dulled the pain, it had not erased it. He still carried the quiet heaviness of a man who had learned that not all rescues come in time. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur, a white blaze on his chest, and eyes the color of burnt amber. He was intelligent and steady, every muscle alert beneath his thick winter coat. Ranger had once served with the K-9 division in Missoula, but after being injured in a warehouse fire, he was reassigned, too scarred for service, yet too loyal to leave behind. Grant had adopted him a year later. Between them existed a silent understanding. Neither spoke of pain, but both recognized it. The radio crackled faintly. Unit 12, report of trespassing near Pine Hollow lot. Possibly kids again. Check it out. Grant sighed, reaching for the mic. Unit 12 responding. His voice was deep, roughened by years of cold air and stronger coffee. He turned off the main road, tires crunching over frost-hardened gravel. The lot sat at the far edge of town, an old lumber yard long abandoned, its buildings sagging beneath the weight of snow and neglect. As he pulled up, the truck's headlights caught broken boards and weeds poking through patches of ice. The place was empty, except for a scattering of crows that lifted into the air with a sound like tearing cloth. Grant stepped out, the cold biting through his gloves. Ranger leapt down beside him, nose to the wind, tail low. "Let's make it quick, partner," Grant murmured, voice forming small clouds in the frigid air. They walked through the skeletal remains of the yard, rusted machinery, barrels half buried in leaves, the faint smell of oil. The world felt suspended between silence and echo. Then Ranger froze, his ears pricked, muscles tensing. A soft whine escaped his throat as he turned sharply toward the far side of the lot, where weeds grew tall and brown. Grant followed the dog's gaze. Amid the brittle grass was a flicker of color, a faded scrap of pink against the earth. He approached carefully. Boots, crunching over frozen dirt. At first, he thought it was a pile of discarded clothes. Then he saw the small hand. "Dear God!" He dropped to one knee. The girl was lying on her side, maybe 7 or 8 years old, her thin arms folded beneath her as if trying to stay warm. Her skin was pale, lips cracked, and her breathing came in shallow, trembling gasps. Her hair, tangled and matted, stuck to her forehead. Around one wrist were faint red marks, too even to be from play. Her dress, once light pink, was torn at the hem. In her small fist, she clutched a frayed piece of thread tied around a bracelet embroidered with the letters A.G. Grant's pulse thundered in his ears. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I need an ambulance at Pine Hollow lot. Child found, critical condition." His voice caught. "She's alive, but barely." Ranger whined softly and lowered his head beside the girl, licking her hand as if urging her to stay awake. The girl stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Her eyes, deep brown, almost black, met Grant's. In them, he saw both terror and something ancient. Endurance beyond her years. "Hey, sweetheart," Grant said softly. "You're safe now. Help's coming." She tried to speak, a whisper no louder than the wind. "Mommy." Grant felt the old ache in his chest twist sharply. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her fragile body. The warmth of her fever burned through the fabric. "Don't talk. Save your strength." He brushed the hair from her face, his gloved fingers shaking slightly. Minutes stretched. The wind whistled through the broken slats of the shed nearby, and Ranger paced in circles, anxious, until the faint wail of sirens broke the silence. Grant exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. When the paramedics arrived, he helped lift the girl onto the stretcher, his heart pounding as though something inside him had reawakened. "Name?" one of the medics asked. "I don't know," Grant replied quietly. "But she's been through hell." As they loaded the stretcher into the ambulance, a paramedic noted, "Good thing you found her when you did, officer. Another hour out here." He didn't finish. Grant nodded mutely, watching the vehicle pull away, red lights reflecting off Ranger's wet eyes. The dog gave a low, mournful bark, and Grant placed a hand on his head. "Yeah, I know, buddy." The world was still again, but different, charged, as if fate had drawn a line in the snow. Grant looked back toward the patch of ground where the girl had been lying. A few strands of her hair clung to the frost. He crouched and picked up the small bracelet she'd dropped when they lifted her. A child's thing, handmade, delicate. The stitching was crude but loving. AG, maybe initials, maybe a plea. As he turned it over, he noticed something faintly scratched on the inside of the charm, a tiny star, almost invisible. Grant frowned, pocketing it carefully. He'd learned over the years that details were rarely accidents. He climbed back into the truck. Ranger jumped in beside him, shaking snow from his coat. For a long moment, Grant didn't start the engine. Through the windshield, the world looked blurred, the falling snow muting everything into stillness. He had seen too many things die in this town. Hope, trust, whole families swallowed by poverty or addiction. But there, in that frozen lot, something had shifted. The girl's eyes had done it. They'd reminded him of a promise he'd once made to a little girl of his own. "Daddy will always come for you." He hadn't kept that promise, but maybe, just maybe, he could keep this one. Grant finally started the engine, steering toward Willow Creek General Hospital. The tires groaned over the icy road, headlights cutting through the pale fog. Ranger sat upright, gaze fixed ahead, as if understanding that this night marked the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The radio crackled again. "Unit 12, status check?" Grant pressed the mic. "Unit 12, en route to Willow Creek General, accompanying patient." He paused, his tone softening. "She's just a kid, and she's holding on." Outside, the snow thickened, swirling in silver spirals beneath the patrol lights. As the truck wound through the dark forest, Grant glanced at the seat beside him. Ranger's ears twitched at every sound, his breath steady. "We're not done tonight," Grant murmured. "Not until we find out who she is." In the distance, the faint lights of the hospital flickered through the mist like a beacon, small, fragile, but real. Grant felt the corners of his mouth tighten into the first almost smile he'd managed in years. When he finally parked outside the emergency entrance, the night had deepened to velvet black, the kind of darkness that made the stars burn brighter. He stepped out, the bracelet still clutched in his hand. Somewhere in that tiny loop of thread and fabric lay a story, a name, a loss, a truth waiting to be uncovered. And for the first time in a long while, Officer Grant Mercer felt something stir in the cold chambers of his heart. Purpose. He looked down at Ranger, who wagged his tail once, as if confirming the thought. "Come on, partner," Grant said softly. "Let's go find her story." He pushed open the glass doors, the warmth and light of the hospital spilling over him like the first breath of dawn. Behind them, the wind rose through the pines, carrying with it the faintest whisper, half memory, half prayer. Some rescues come late, but they still come. Snow had stopped falling by the time Officer Grant Mercer left the emergency bay. The sky over Willow Creek General Hospital was a dull gray canvas, heavy with the scent of salt and antiseptic. The town below the hill still slept under its blanket of frost, and the only sound breaking the stillness was the hum of generators and the steady rhythm of Ranger's claws clicking softly against the tiled floor as he followed his partner inside. The waiting area was nearly empty, just a nurse sorting through papers and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Grant stood for a moment at the front desk, his coat still damp with melted snow, his face pale under the artificial glow. Ranger sat at his side, alert, his amber eyes sweeping the hallway as if memorizing every sound. A woman emerged from the double doors, a doctor, early 40s, tall and willowy with chestnut hair pulled into a loose bun. Her name tag read, Dr. Claire Rowan, though Grant didn't need to read it to know her. They had grown up in Willow Creek together, gone to the same high school. He hadn't seen her since she left for medical school in Seattle. Grant Mercer, she said, her tone a mix of surprise and concern. It's been years. Too many, Grant replied softly, removing his hat. They told me you were the one treating the girl. Claire nodded, slipping the stethoscope from around her neck. Her face was gentle but weary, the kind of tiredness that came from carrying too many broken stories home. She's stable for now, dehydrated, feverish, but she's a fighter. We've given her fluids and started antibiotics. She was hypothermic when she came in. Any idea who she is? Not yet. Claire's eyes softened. We found marks around her wrists and ankles. Old scars, not fresh. Whoever kept her like that, it wasn't just neglect. Grant swallowed hard. She said one word before passing out. Mommy. Claire glanced down at the clipboard in her hands. We're running her prints through missing persons databases, but so far nothing. Maybe she's from out of state. She hesitated, studying Grant's face. You've seen a lot of things on this job, but I don't think you've seen anything like this. Grant's hand brushed the pocket of his coat, feeling the small fabric bracelet still tucked inside. I found this on her wrist, he said, offering it to Claire. The letters AG glinted faintly under the sterile light. Claire took it carefully, her fingers tracing the hand-stitched thread. A child made this, or someone who loved her. AG could be her initials. Amelia Grace, Anna Green, anything. It might be a clue. I was hoping it would tell us more, Grant said, but it's the only thing she had. Claire placed the bracelet into an evidence bag. We'll keep it safe. Maybe it'll mean something to her when she wakes. She looked at him, her expression softening. You're still the same, you know, always the one who takes the lost ones home. Grant didn't answer. The words hit a part of him he didn't show to anyone, not since the accident that had taken his wife and daughter a decade ago. He'd built his life on duty in silence since then, like a wall against everything that hurt. But seeing the girl lying there in the snow had cracked something open. Can I see her? He asked quietly. Claire nodded. For a few minutes. She led him down the hallway. The pediatric ward smelled faintly of lavender disinfectant and clean linen. The small figure lay motionless in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the white sheets. Her skin had regained a hint of color, her lips no longer blue but soft pink. A thin IV line snaked into her wrist, and her breathing rose and fell in slow, fragile rhythms. Grant stood by her side, his shadow falling across the bed. She's just a kid, he murmured. What kind of world does this to someone like her? She'll need time, Claire said gently. Not just for her body to heal, but her mind. I'll ask social services to send someone by tomorrow, but... She hesitated. You know how it goes. They'll move her through the system before she even knows where she is. Grant looked at the girl again, then at Ranger, who sat quietly by the door, tail curled around his paws. No, he said. Not this one. Claire tilted her head. You planning to break protocol, officer? He almost smiled. Wouldn't be the first time. A quiet laugh escaped her, brief but warm. You haven't changed much either. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, the years between them vanished. Then a voice interrupted from the hallway. Dr. Rowan? A nurse entered, Nurse Lily Bennett, mid-20s, petite, with dark curls pinned behind her ears and kind eyes that carried more empathy than her years should have allowed. She handed Claire a clipboard. Vitals are steady, but her temperature's still a little high. She hasn't woken yet. Thanks, Lily, Claire said, taking it. We'll keep monitoring. Lily glanced at Grant, curiosity flickering across her face. You're the officer who found her? Yes. She's lucky, Lily said softly. A night like this, she wouldn't have made it another hour. Then, noticing Ranger, her lips curved into a small smile. And who's this handsome hero? Ranger, Grant replied. My partner. Lily crouched to scratch the dog behind the ears, and Ranger leaned forward, accepting the affection with quiet dignity. You can tell he's protective, she said. He hasn't taken his eyes off her since you walked in. Yeah, Grant murmured. Neither have I. After a while, Claire turned to him. You should go home, Grant. Get some rest. She's in good hands tonight. But he shook his head. I'll stay, just in case she wakes up. Claire studied him, then sighed. Fine. I'll have Lily bring you some coffee. Don't make a habit of haunting my ward. When she left, the room grew still again, except for the faint hum of machines. Grant sat in the chair by the window, the moon casting long shadows across the floor. Ranger curled beside his boots, his breathing deep and even. For hours, Grant watched the little girl, unable to look away. Once she stirred, murmuring something incoherent. Her small fingers twitched, reaching toward the edge of the bed as though searching for something familiar. He rose and gently placed the bracelet on the nightstand beside her. It's here, he whispered. You're safe now. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passage of time in small, tender increments. Grant leaned back in the chair, exhaustion tugging at his eyelids. Outside, the wind began again, whispering through the pine trees like a distant lullaby. He didn't notice Claire returning later that night to check the monitors, her expression softening when she saw him asleep in the chair, head tilted toward the bed, Ranger guarding them both. She stood for a long moment in the doorway, the light from the hall outlining the quiet tableau. One broken man, one wounded child, and the faithful creature that watched over them. Something about it filled her with a strange peace. Perhaps, she thought, miracles didn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes they came quietly, in the form of a weary cop and a loyal dog who refused to give up. When morning came, a soft glow spilled through the blinds, painting the room in pale gold. The girl's eyes opened briefly, glassy and confused, but alive. Her gaze wandered until it found Grant slumped beside her, still asleep. For a heartbeat, she simply stared, then reached out a trembling hand toward the bracelet on the table. Her lips moved, forming a sound too faint to hear. And for the first time in years, Grant Mercer would wake to find hope staring back at him. By the time the first light crept over Willow Creek, the frost on the hospital windows had begun to melt into thin rivers that traced the glass like quiet tears. Officer Grant Mercer hadn't slept much. He had spent the night in the chair beside the girl's bed, half dozing, half listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing. Ranger lay curled at his feet, one paw twitching as if chasing something in his dreams. When Grant finally stood to stretch, the sun was already breaking through the pines, painting the room in pale amber. Dr. Claire Rowan entered just as he was rubbing the stiffness from his shoulders. Her scrubs were the color of slate, and her eyes carried the familiar fatigue of someone who had been on duty too long. Still, she smiled faintly. You were here all night? Didn't want her to wake up alone, Grant replied. Claire's smile deepened, but there was a sadness behind it. Her fever broke around 3. She whispered something, a name, I think, but too soft to catch. You seemed to calm her. She stirred a few times and reached toward you. Grant's gaze drifted to the bracelet now resting on the bedside table. She's been through something I can't shake from my mind. Whoever hurt her might still be out there. Claire's tone softened. Then maybe you should find out. But, Grant, don't lose yourself in it. He didn't answer, only nodded. There was something he had to see for himself. Outside, the morning air bitted his skin, crisp and thin. The snow had hardened overnight, and the sound of his boots echoed across the hospital parking lot. Ranger jumped into the truck, tail thumping once against the seat as Grant started the engine. The old lumber lot where he had found the girl sat several miles out of town, past the frozen creek and through a thicket of tall pines. The place looked different in daylight, less haunted, more forgotten. But the unease still hung there, thick as the mist that rolled low over the ground. Grant parked near the rotted fence and climbed out. Ranger leapt down beside him, nose to the air, tail stiff. "Let's take another look, partner." They crossed the clearing, the sound of distant crows echoing between the trees. The air smelled faintly of smoke, old, lingering, like something once burned here. Grant approached the dilapidated house at the edge of the lot. The blue paint was peeling in long curls, and the windows were boarded from the inside. He reached for the handle. It gave with a sigh. The door creaked open into stale air and dust. The living room was a collage of neglect, faded wallpaper, a couch missing its cushions, a child's shoe half buried beneath the debris. Ranger sniffed along the baseboards, then paused near a dark stain on the floorboards. He looked up, ears flat, letting out a low growl. Grant crouched beside him. "What is it?" He followed the dog's gaze and noticed faint impressions on the wood, small footprints, too light to belong to an adult, leading toward the hallway. "Good boy," Grant murmured. "Show me." Ranger led him through the narrow corridor to a closed door at the back. The knob was scratched, and the door itself had been locked from the outside with a sliding bolt. Grant felt a cold weight in his chest. He unlatched it and stepped in. The room was small, almost unnaturally neat compared to the rest of the house. A narrow bed sat against the wall, its blanket carefully folded. A lamp with a pink shade rested on a small table. On the wall hung a child's drawing, crude but full of care. A stick figure of a girl, holding hands with a taller woman beneath a bright yellow sun. Above it, in crooked letters, "Me and Mommy." Grant's throat tightened. This was her room. Ranger sniffed near the bed, then began pawing at the floorboards. Something clicked faintly beneath his claws. Grant knelt and lifted the edge of a loose plank. Underneath lay a folded photograph, the corners yellowed. He unfolded it carefully. The image showed a woman with long, dark hair and green eyes that held both strength and sadness. In her arms, a baby wrapped in a pink blanket. The handwriting on the back read, "Evelyn and Amelia, 2017. Grant exhaled slowly. "So, your name's Amelia." He stood there for a long moment, the photo trembling slightly in his hand. Evelyn? Was she the mother? If so, where was she now? He scanned the room again, noticing a calendar tacked to the wall. The days had been crossed out until October 3rd, 3 weeks ago. Beside that date was one handwritten word, medicine. Someone was keeping track of time, he murmured. As he pocketed the photo, his radio buzzed faintly. "Unit 12, come in. We've got a call from Detective Brooks. Wants to talk to you about your find last night." Grant sighed. "Tell him I'll be there in 10. Before leaving, he took one last look around. Ranger's attention had shifted toward the corner of the room, where a small wooden toy sat on the shelf. A carved dog, painted black and tan, one ear missing. Grant picked it up and smiled faintly. "Looks like you, pal." Ranger wagged his tail once, as if proud of the resemblance. At the station, Detective Eric Brooks waited for him. Brooks was in his late 50s, thick-set, with a salt and pepper beard and a permanent scowl carved into his face. A veteran of too many unsolved cases, he carried the cynical calm of a man who'd seen justice twist itself into bureaucracy one form at a time. "You really know how to ruin retirement plans, Mercer," Brooks grunted as Grant walked in. "Morning to you, too," Grant said dryly, sliding the photo across the desk. "Found this in the house. The girl's name might be Amelia. Her mother's Evelyn Grace, if that's still her legal name." Brooks examined the photo, squinting. "Grace. That name rings a bell. We had a missing person report 3 years back. Woman vanished with her kid after a domestic dispute in Missoula. Case went cold." Grant's pulse quickened. "You think it's them?" "Could be," Brooks said, leaning back. "But if so, why resurface here after 3 years? And who locked that room?" Grant rubbed a hand over his jaw. "I don't know yet, but the girl's been through hell. Someone wanted her hidden." Brooks sighed. "Look, Grant, I know that look. Don't get too close. You've done your part, found the kid. Let social services take it from here." But Grant's silence was answer enough. Before Brooks could argue further, Captain Linda Shaw appeared at the doorway. A sharp-featured woman in her early 50s, her uniform crisp, her expression always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. "Detective, Officer Mercer," she said briskly. "We've got reporters sniffing around already. The hospital's keeping the girl's identity confidential, and I want it to stay that way. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Grant replied, though his tone carried a quiet defiance. When the meeting ended, he drove back toward the hospital. The sun was sinking, setting the snow ablaze with gold. Ranger sat alert in the back seat, occasionally pressing his nose to the window. At the hospital, Nurse Lily met him in the hallway. "She's awake," she whispered, "but she's not speaking, just stares at that bracelet." Grant entered the room quietly. Amelia sat up in bed now, her hair brushed clean, her small fingers turning the bracelet over and over. When she saw him, her eyes widened, recognition flickering like a spark. "Hey there," he said gently. "You're safe now? My name's Grant. This is Ranger." Ranger padded closer, tail wagging softly. Amelia reached out a trembling hand and touched his fur. "Our Ranger," she whispered, her voice hoarse but real. Grant's heart tightened. "That's right, sweetheart. He's our good boy." Amelia looked at him then, truly looked, and something in her expression, trust, fragile and new, made Grant realize he was already in too deep to turn back. Outside the window, the snow began to fall again, slow and silent, and somewhere, far beyond the trees, a story long buried was beginning to stir. The next morning dawned pale and brittle, the kind of winter light that made even hope seem fragile. Inside Willow Creek General Hospital, the hallways were washed in that early gold, long shadows stretching across the tile. Officer Grant Mercer stood by the window of room 204, hands in his jacket pockets, watching frost dissolve on the glass. Behind him, the little girl named Amelia, no longer Jane Doe, was awake. Her eyes, large and brown like pools of rainwater, followed every movement he made. "Morning, sweetheart," Grant said softly, turning toward her. His voice carried the warmth of someone trying not to startle a bird. "How are you feeling?" Amelia didn't speak. She only clutched the blanket tighter. Ranger lay curled on the floor beside her bed, tail thumping once when she looked down at him. She hesitated, then reached out her small hand to touch his fur. The German shepherd shifted closer, resting his chin near her leg. Dr. Claire Rowan entered, her hair damp from the shower, steam still clinging faintly to her coat. She wore no makeup, she never did, but her calm presence filled the room with quiet authority. "Good morning, Officer Mercer. Our little patient's doing better. Fever's gone and she's had some water." She leaned over to check Amelia's IV line, then smiled. "You made quite an impression. She asked for you when she woke up." Grant blinked, surprised. "She did?" Claire nodded, glancing at the girl. She said, "The man with the dog. That's you, right?" He smiled faintly. "That's us." Amelia's lips trembled, and she whispered almost inaudibly, "Mommy." The word was small, raw, and it broke through the sterile air like a fragile melody. Claire froze for a second, then crouched beside her. "You miss your mommy, honey?" Claire asked gently. Amelia nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Grant felt something deep inside him twist, an echo of loss he knew too well. After a moment, Claire stood and motioned for him to step into the hallway. Outside, the lights buzzed faintly above their heads. "She's remembering," Claire said quietly, "but she's terrified. There are signs of trauma, classic confinement behavior. She flinches at loud noises, avoids eye contact. I don't think she's spoken to anyone in a long time." Grant rubbed the back of his neck. "The house where I found her? It looked like someone had been living there recently. There was food in the kitchen, a child's bed, everything neat except one locked room." Claire frowned. "Locked from the outside?" He nodded. "Then she was being kept there," Claire said, her voice heavy. "By who, though?" Before Grant could answer, a new voice interrupted them, a woman's, brisk but kind. "Excuse me, doctor." They turned to see Evelyn Shaw, a social worker from the county. She was in her late 30s, short, with auburn hair, tied in a bun and glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Her expression was professional, yet weary, the look of someone who had seen too many lives unravel under paperwork and policies. "I'm here for the intake interview," she said, shaking Claire's hand. Then she looked at Grant. "You're the officer who found the girl, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you for bringing her in. We'll need your report for child services. I'll try speaking with her now." Claire hesitated. "I'm not sure that's a good idea. She's barely begun to trust anyone." Evelyn sighed. "I know, but the system has rules." She softened. "Don't worry, I'll be gentle." Inside the room, Amelia had started to hum, a faint, tuneless sound that seemed to calm Ranger, who lifted his head and listened. When Evelyn entered, Amelia's humming stopped. Her eyes darted toward the door. Evelyn crouched low, keeping her distance, her voice calm. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name's Evelyn. I help kids who need a safe place to stay. Do you know your name?" Amelia's fingers twisted the blanket. No answer. "That's okay," Evelyn continued. "You don't have to talk if you're scared." She offered a soft smile. "You can just nod or shake your head, all right?" Amelia glanced toward Grant. When she saw his reassuring nod, she turned back to Evelyn and whispered, Amelia." "Amelia," Evelyn repeated gently. "That's a beautiful name." The girl's next words came broken, trembling. "Where's Mommy?" Evelyn's voice faltered for a moment. "We're trying to find her, sweetie. Can you tell me anything about her?" Amelia's gaze unfocused, as if looking through the wall. She said, "Stars will guide me." Her lips trembled. Then, dark came. Grant felt his stomach knot. Claire quietly motioned for Evelyn to stop. "That's enough for today," she murmured. "She's remembering too fast." When they stepped out again, Evelyn looked troubled. "Officer Mercer, I'll have to file temporary custody paperwork. She'll need to be placed somewhere safe until we locate her mother." Grant frowned. "Where exactly?" "A foster home in Helena. The state has to take over once she's discharged." "No," he said immediately. "You can't move her yet. She's barely stable, physically or otherwise." Evelyn sighed. "I understand your concern, officer, but this isn't your decision. The system will protect her." Grant's jaw tightened. "The same system that lost her in the first place?" Evelyn's expression flickered. Guilt, perhaps, or resignation. "I'll delay the transfer a few days, but you didn't hear that from me." When she left, Claire leaned against the wall beside him. "You're not going to let her go, are you?" He looked through the window at Amelia and Ranger curled together, a small hand resting on his fur. "Not until I know who she is and where her mother went." That evening, after his shift ended, Grant drove back to the precinct. The snow had returned, heavier now, blanketing the world in white silence. The station was nearly empty except for Sergeant Calvin Reed, a stocky man with thinning blonde hair and a permanent coffee stain on his tie. Reed was one of those officers who joked through exhaustion, loyal but burnt at the edges. "You look like hell, Mercer," Reed said as Grant entered. "You find that kid's parents yet?" "Not yet, but I found a photograph. Her mother's name is Evelyn Grace, missing for 3 years." Reed whistled. "Grace, wasn't that the woman tied to that welfare fraud case in Missoula? Something about a nonprofit?" Grant froze. "What nonprofit?" "Some foundation that handled foster adoptions. Haynes Foundation, I think. Supposed to help at-risk kids. Turns out the money disappeared, and the director skipped town." Grant remembered the word written on the calendar, medicine. He thought of the neat room, the locked door. Something about all of it didn't fit with a runaway mother. "Send me whatever files you've got," he said. Reed frowned. "You're not assigned to that case anymore, Mercer. Captain Shaw will have my hide if she finds out." Grant's eyes hardened. "Then she doesn't have to." Reed stared at him for a moment, then sighed. "You never did know when to quit, did you?" He opened a drawer, pulling out a thin folder. "Don't say I didn't warn you." Later that night, Grant parked his truck outside the hospital again. Through the window, he could see Amelia asleep under the soft glow of a lamp. Ranger sat guard beside her bed, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his breathing. Grant leaned against the cold hood of his truck, snow falling silently around him, and whispered to the darkness, "I'll find her, kiddo. I promise." Inside, Amelia stirred in her sleep, mumbling a single word, half dream, half memory. "Mommy, The snow came down in waves that night, blanketing Willow Creek under a hush so complete that even the wind seemed afraid to speak. Officer Grant Mercer sat at his kitchen table, the faint lamplight glinting off the photograph he had taken from Amelia's room, the one of Evelyn Grace holding her baby. The edges were worn, but her expression haunted him, the look of a woman who loved fiercely and feared endlessly. Ranger lay at his feet, chin on his paws, eyes following Grant's every move. The soft rise and fall of the dog's chest was the only sound in the room besides the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Grant's small cabin was modest, wood walls scarred by time, shelves filled with case files he hadn't been able to throw away. He'd built a quiet life here after the accident, but since finding Amelia, the silence had begun to feel heavier, almost accusing. He took a slow sip of coffee gone cold and flipped open the thin folder Sergeant Reed had given him earlier that day. The first page bore the header, Haynes Foundation for Child Welfare. Underneath was a photo of Robert Haynes, a man in his late 40s with slicked-back blonde hair, tailored suits, and a smile too sharp to trust. The report painted him as a philanthropist, funding orphanages, adoption centers, and child recovery programs across Montana. But between the lines, the truth shimmered uneasily. Money missing from grants, reports of unverified placements, and names of children who had vanished without explanation. Grant traced one line with his finger. Case review, initiated 2019, terminated without cause. Someone had buried this deep. He stared at the words until Ranger gave a low whine, breaking his trance. "Yeah, boy," Grant muttered, rubbing the dog's head. "Smells rotten to me, too." The following morning, Grant returned to the hospital, bringing Amelia a paper bag filled with small things, a coloring book, a plush toy, and a pack of crayons. Nurse Lily greeted him at the reception desk, her face lighting up despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "You're early," she said, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Couldn't sleep," Grant admitted. "How's she doing?" "Better. She's talking a little, mostly to Ranger." Lily's smile softened. "It's the first time I've seen her laugh." When Grant entered the room, Amelia was sitting upright, holding one of Ranger's ears between her tiny fingers. "You're gentle," he told her with a smile. "He likes that." Amelia looked up shyly. "He doesn't bite?" "Nope," Grant said. "He's too polite for that." Her lips curved into a small, uncertain smile. "I like him." "Good," he said quietly. "He likes you too." Claire appeared then, clipboard in hand, her eyes bright despite the sleepless nights. She wore a gray turtleneck under her white coat, her hair tied back in a messy bun. "You two are becoming quite the team," she said softly. Grant gestured toward the door. "Can we talk outside?" In the hallway, he lowered his voice. "Claire, I need your help. Have you ever heard of the Haynes Foundation?" She frowned. "Yes, they funded our pediatric wing years ago." "Why?" He handed her a photocopy of a document from his folder. Evelyn Grace worked there. 3 years ago, she filed an internal complaint about missing records. 2 weeks later, she disappeared with Amelia. Claire scanned the page, her expression tightening. "If what you're suggesting is true, this could go far beyond a single case." "I'm suggesting someone's using that foundation as cover," Grant said. "I think Evelyn found out." A voice interrupted them, a man's, smooth and confident. "Detective Mercer, isn't it?" They turned to see Martin Caldwell, the hospital administrator, approaching. He was in his early 50s, trim, with thinning silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind rimless glasses. His tailored navy suit and measured gait screamed control. "I heard you've been spending quite a bit of time here," Caldwell said with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I appreciate your concern for the girl, but please remember, this is a hospital, not a precinct." "I'm aware," Grant replied evenly. Caldwell's gaze flicked to Claire. "Doctor, I'll need the child's file for review. The foundation still technically sponsors our pediatric care program, and our donors are curious." "I'm afraid patient confidentiality doesn't bend to curiosity," Claire said, her tone cool. Caldwell's smile thinned. "Of course, just following procedure." He turned and left, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Grant exhaled. "You trust him?" I trust his ambition, Claire said, which means I trust him about as far as Ranger can throw him. That evening, Grant stopped by the diner at the edge of town, a quiet place with checkered floors and the smell of bacon grease that never quite left the air. The waitress, Marla, was a plump woman in her 50s with dyed red hair and a laugh that could shake the windows. She'd known Grant since his rookie years and had made it her personal mission to feed him whenever he looked too tired to argue. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring before he could nod. "Make it strong," Grant said. "You hear anything about a guy named Haynes?" Marla leaned on the counter. "The millionaire who built those orphan homes? Sure. Comes through once a year, shakes hands with the mayor, donates big, then vanishes. Word is, he bought land outside of town. Old sawmill property." Grant froze. The sawmill. The same direction as the abandoned house. He finished his coffee in silence and left a 20 on the counter. "Thanks, Marla." "You in trouble again, Mercer?" she called after him. "Always," he said, without turning back. Later that night, he parked his truck near the old service road that led to the sawmill. Snow muffled every sound. Ranger jumped down beside him, nose twitching. The moon hung low, silvering the forest. As they approached the property, Grant saw lights flickering through the trees, a faint glow from an outbuilding behind the old mill. He moved closer, crouching behind a rusted truck. Through a cracked window, he saw men loading boxes into a van. On one of the crates, stenciled letters read, "HF Child Services." Grant pulled out his phone and snapped a photo, but before he could take another, Ranger growled low. A figure emerged from the shadows behind them. "Officer Mercer," a voice drawled, "you really should mind your own business." It was Detective Eric Brooks, his face half lit by a cigarette's glow. His eyes looked tired, but something in them had changed, colder, harder. "Brooks," Grant said, lowering his hand slowly. "What are you doing here?" "Following orders," Brooks replied. "You're poking into things that aren't yours to fix." "Are you working for Haynes?" Brooks flicked the cigarette away. "Walk away, Mercer, for your sake, and that kid's." Before Grant could respond, headlights flared from the building. The van rolled past, tires crunching on snow, its taillights disappearing into the dark. Brooks stepped aside, watching silently. When Grant finally turned back to him, the man was gone. Only the smell of tobacco lingered in the cold air. He exhaled shakily, his breath misting in the light. "Come on, Ranger," he murmured. "Looks like the shadows run deeper than we thought." They walked back toward the truck, snowflakes swirling in the wind like whispers. In his pocket, Grant's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop looking," or "She disappears again." He stared at the screen until Ranger nudged his leg, eyes full of concern. "Yeah," Grant said quietly, sliding the phone away. "We're not stopping." The blizzard swept in from the northern ridge without warning. By the time Officer Grant Mercer reached the outskirts of Willow Creek, the world had turned to white, roads buried, sky erased. The wipers of his truck dragged sluggishly against ice as Ranger's silhouette shifted beside him, the dog's nose pressed against the glass, alert. The text message still burned in Grant's pocket. "Stop looking." Or "She disappears again." It was unsigned, but the threat hung over him like a storm cloud. He parked near the ranger station, the only building with lights still burning through the snow. Inside, the wood stove crackled, filling the room with the scent of smoke and damp wool. Sitting at a desk cluttered with maps was Sheriff Nathan Cole, a man in his late 50s with a weather-beaten face, thick gray mustache, and the kind of eyes that had seen every shade of human folly. Cole was old-school law, a man who believed in handshakes and gut instinct more than databases. "Evening, Mercer," he said, looking up from his coffee. "You're out late." "Had a lead," Grant said, shaking the snow from his coat. "About the Grace case." Cole's brow furrowed. "That old mess? Thought the mother ran off." "That's what they wanted us to think," Grant replied. "I found records connecting her to Haynes Foundation. She filed a report before she vanished. Last night, I caught men moving crates from an old sawmill outside town, labeled with the Foundation's initials." Cole set down his mug slowly. "You're saying Haynes is running something illegal?" "I'm saying kids went missing under their watch," Grant said, "including Amelia." Cole's sigh filled the silence. "Careful, Mercer. Robert Haynes isn't just a name on a door. He funds half the county's budget, knows every politician from here to Helena. Cross him, and you'll find yourself patrolling parking tickets in Bozeman. I didn't join this job to make friends, Grant said, his tone flat. The sheriff studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'll pretend I didn't hear that. He reached for a file cabinet and pulled out a thin folder covered in dust. Evelyn Grace, last sighting 3 years ago, near the Ridge Road by Pine Lake. Car abandoned, no body found. He slid the file across the table. We searched, but the trail went cold. Grant flipped through the photos. Evelyn's car crushed against a pine trunk. The passenger window shattered. Was there any sign she survived? Cole hesitated. There was blood on the seat, but not enough to kill a person. We figured she ran. Maybe someone helped her disappear. Or someone made her disappear, Grant murmured. He gathered the file, thanked the sheriff, and left. The storm outside had worsened, wind howling through the trees like an animal in pain. The drive back to his cabin was slow, each mile swallowed by snow. Ranger whined, occasionally, sensing Grant's unease. When they finally reached home, the headlights caught something half buried near the mailbox. A scarf, frozen stiff, its fabric torn. Grant picked it up. The pattern was faint but familiar. It matched the one in the photo of Evelyn holding Amelia. Ranger sniffed it and let out a low growl. Grant's pulse quickened. Tracks, boy! Find them! The dog lowered his nose to the snow, circling until he caught a scent. Then, without hesitation, he darted toward the forest. Grant followed, flashlight cutting through the swirling white. The storm roared around them, muffling every sound except Ranger's barks. They moved deeper into the trees until the beam of light caught the shape of a small wooden structure, a hunting shack long forgotten, its roof sagging under snow. The door was cracked open. Ranger growled again, ears flattened. Grant pushed inside. The air smelled of damp ash and something faintly metallic, blood, old but not ancient. A lantern hung from a nail, flickering weakly. In the corner lay a bedroll, a thermos, and an old leather satchel. He knelt, unzipping it. Inside were documents, a torn photograph of Amelia, and a small notebook. The first page bore shaky handwriting. If someone finds this, my name is Evelyn Grace. They're still watching. Tell my daughter I never stopped trying. Grant felt the words like a punch. He turned the pages carefully, reading her desperate entries. Evelyn described being chased, hiding from them, and a discovery that had put her life in danger. The last entry ended abruptly. They found me. I'm heading toward the lake. If I don't make it, the truth is in the star map. The star map, Grant whispered, remembering Amelia's fragmented words. He folded the journal and tucked it inside his coat. Ranger paced near the doorway, uneasy. Then he saw it. Burn marks near the window, and something glinting in the ashes. He sifted through them and uncovered a small metal locket, its surface scorched but intact. Inside was a photo of Evelyn and Amelia, and on the opposite side, a symbol etched into the metal. A stylized compass rose with a star at its center. He snapped a picture with his phone before pocketing it. Outside, thunder cracked, a rare sound in snow. He turned back toward the truck when a shadow moved between the trees. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the storm. Grant froze, hand instinctively going to his holster. "Who's there?" The figure didn't answer, but took a step forward, tall, wearing a dark parka and hood. For a fleeting moment, the lantern light caught a glimpse of pale skin and green eyes. Evelyn. Grant's breath hitched. "Evelyn Grace?" But before he could move closer, Ranger barked sharply. A second later, the figure turned and vanished into the white blur, leaving only footprints that disappeared almost as quickly as they formed. Grant ran after her, shouting her name, but the storm swallowed his voice. By the time he reached the tree line, she was gone. Only the scarf and the satchel remained. He stood there, chest heaving, snow caking his lashes. If she had survived, she'd been living in the shadows all this time, watching, protecting, or running. When he returned to the cabin, Ranger lay by the fire, eyes half closed but still alert. Grant spread Evelyn's notes across the table, scanning every page again. There were names, initials, and sketches. One of them unmistakably the Haynes Foundation logo. At the bottom of one page, a single line stood out. They use the children's program to transport more than donations. Grant leaned back in his chair, realization dawning like an icy dawn. Haynes wasn't rescuing children. He was moving them. He closed the notebook and looked at Ranger. "She's alive," he whispered, "and she's still fighting." Ranger lifted his head, tail brushing the floor. Grant's phone buzzed again, another message from the same number. This time, only 3 words. "You're too late." He stared at the screen, the glow painting his face in pale light. Then he looked toward the window where snow kept falling, silent, endless, relentless. "Not yet," he muttered. "Not while she's still out there." Outside, the storm howled, but within the small circle of lamplight, something steady had reignited in his eyes, a promise that refused to die. The following morning arrived muted, the snowstorm finally spent, leaving behind a landscape of white silence. The forest that surrounded Grant Mercer's cabin glistened under a gray dawn, every branch heavy with frost. Inside, the fire had burned down to embers, and Ranger slept curled beside the hearth, his fur dusted with ash and light. Grant sat at his kitchen table, Evelyn's worn journal open before him. He traced the final line again and again. "The truth is in the star map." For hours he tried to make sense of it, flipping through the pages filled with scribbled coordinates, constellations, and childlike sketches of stars. Each drawing had something different, some marked with circles, others with arrows pointing toward unfamiliar names. Hollow Ridge, North Gate, Pine Vale. None of them were random. Evelyn had been leaving breadcrumbs. When the door creaked open, a gust of cold air swept in, followed by Dr. Claire Rowan, wrapped in a long navy coat and wool scarf. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her expression worried. "You weren't answering your phone," she said, stepping inside and shutting the door. "I figured you'd be here drowning yourself in coffee." Grant looked up from the table. "You figured right." Claire took off her gloves and moved closer, eyes scanning the scattered papers. "What is all this?" "Evelyn's journal, found it in a shack out by Pine Lake. She's alive, Claire. I saw her, or at least, I think I did." Claire blinked. "You saw her?" "Just for a second," he said, before she vanished again. He slid one of the pages toward her. "She wrote something about a star map. I think she hid evidence somewhere using constellations as coordinates." Claire frowned, tracing the lines with her finger. "She used to volunteer in the astronomy program at Willow Creek High. Maybe she used a star chart as a cipher." Grant gave a small nod. "That's what I thought. The problem is, these coordinates don't match anything on local maps." Claire leaned against the table, thinking. What if they're not geographic coordinates but symbolic ones? Something only she and Amelia would understand. Grant's gaze drifted to the childlike drawing of a mother and daughter beneath the stars. The girl mentioned her mother said the stars would guide her. He rubbed his temple. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a message. Before Claire could respond, Ranger lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked. A car was approaching the cabin. The crunch of tires on frozen gravel broke the stillness. Grant moved to the window. A black SUV pulled up outside, snow spraying from its wheels. The door opened, and Detective Eric Brooks stepped out, collar raised, cigarette dangling from his lips. His face looked older than it had a week ago, the weight of something heavy pressing behind his eyes. Grant opened the door. "You're brave, coming here after last night." Brooks took a drag, exhaling smoke that mingled with the cold. "Didn't come to fight, just to warn you." "About what?" "You're in over your head," Brooks said, voice low. "Haynes is pulling strings in every department from Missoula to Billings. There are people who will bury this before it sees daylight. You want to help that girl? Walk away before they make you disappear too." Grant folded his arms. "I don't walk away from children, Brooks. Not anymore." The detective sighed, rubbing his temple. "You don't get it. They're watching everything. Your calls, your movements. That kid is leverage to them." He hesitated, glancing toward the window. "You're not the only one who got that text." Grant's eyes narrowed. "They threatened you too?" Brooks didn't answer. He flicked the cigarette into the snow and turned back toward the car. "You didn't hear this from me, but check the town's old survey archives. The Haynes Foundation bought property under shell names years ago. Look for Hollow Ridge. That's where it starts." Then he was gone, the SUV disappearing down the winding road like a shadow swallowed by the trees. Grant stood in silence for a moment before turning to Claire. "Hollow Ridge," he said. "It's mentioned in the journal, too." Claire frowned. "That area's been fenced off for years. They said it was for environmental restoration." Grant grabbed his coat. "I'll believe that when I see it." A few hours later, Grant drove north along the Ridge Road, the world around them frozen and still. Ranger sat in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the cracked window. The forest gave way to open land, a vast stretch of snow-covered fields leading to a cluster of derelict buildings. A rusted sign lay half buried in the snow. Hollow Ridge Observatory, closed to public. The observatory stood like a tomb, its once-glass dome shattered, its metal ribs jutting into the sky like bones. Grant and Ranger moved cautiously through the snow, their breath visible in the frigid air. Inside, the building smelled of rust and dust. Old telescopes sat abandoned, and broken panels of glass crunched beneath his boots. On the far wall, faded murals of constellations stretched across the ceiling. Grant pulled out the journal, flipping to Evelyn's star sketches. "She wasn't mapping the sky," he muttered. "She was mapping this place." Ranger barked softly, drawing his attention to a metal panel on the floor. The dog's claws scraped against it, revealing a latch almost invisible under grime. Grant crouched, pried it open, and found a compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a sealed tin box. He lifted it out, heart pounding. Inside were photographs, documents, and a USB drive wrapped in cloth. One photo showed children in hospital gowns, standing beside Robert Haynes. Another showed trucks labeled HF Child Services outside a remote warehouse. It was proof, enough to destroy everything the Foundation claimed to be. Grant exhaled slowly. She hid it here. She knew they'd never look in the stars. As he examined the photos, Ranger growled again. Outside, an engine roared to life. Grant peeked through a crack in the wall, 2 black SUVs pulling up near the entrance, men in heavy coats stepping out. "Damn it," he muttered, grabbing the tin box. "Time to move." He and Ranger slipped through the side exit, boots crunching softly in the snow. They darted toward the tree line, staying low. Voices shouted behind them, flashlights slicing through the dusk. One beam swept across the snow, landing briefly on Ranger's tail before they disappeared into the forest. Grant didn't stop until they reached the frozen river. He crouched behind a fallen log, breathing hard, the tin box pressed to his chest. Ranger panted beside him, eyes wide and alert. From across the valley, the observatory glowed faintly in the twilight, like a dying lantern. Claire's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't lose yourself in this, Grant." He smiled grimly. Too late for that. When they finally reached the truck, Grant tucked the tin box under the seat and started the engine. Ranger curled beside him, resting his head on Grant's arm. The snow began to fall again, soft, steady, indifferent. As the headlights cut through the night, Grant knew one thing for certain. Evelyn had left him the truth, and now it was his to finish. Somewhere far away, in the same snow-covered wilderness, a lone woman watched the lights of his truck fade into the distance. Her face was pale, her green eyes fierce. "Find it, Grant," Evelyn whispered to the dark, "before they find her again." By dawn, the storm had quieted, leaving the sky streaked with faint rose and silver. Grant Mercer's truck rolled through the outskirts of Willow Creek, the windshield streaked with salt and snow, the tin evidence box resting on the seat beside him. Ranger's ears flicked as the first light caught the treetops, his breath fogging the window. They'd made it out alive, but Grant knew the night wasn't done chasing them. Someone had known he'd gone to Hollow Ridge. Someone inside the system. He parked behind the Old Town Library, a squat stone building that looked like it had been carved out of history itself. The scent of cedar and dust lingered even before he stepped inside. Behind the front desk sat Martha Jennings, the librarian, an older woman in her 60s with silver hair pinned neatly at her nape and a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Martha had known Grant since his rookie years. She was one of those people the town forgot to appreciate until it needed something hidden. "You look like you fought a blizzard and lost," she said, peering over her glasses. "Something like that," Grant replied, setting the tin box on the counter. "I need a secure place to go through some files. No questions." Martha's eyes softened. You know I stopped asking questions when you started bringing that dog around. She nodded toward Ranger, who wagged his tail politely. Downstairs, doors unlocked. I'll bring coffee. The basement smelled of old paper and forgotten stories. Grant spread the documents across a long oak table under a single hanging lamp. Ranger lay nearby, alert but calm, eyes tracking every movement. The photographs inside the box were clearer now under steady light. Faces of children, medical records, and transfer logs signed by R. Haynes and E. Brooks. Grant froze. Brooks, the detective who'd warned him off, had been part of the operation all along. It wasn't just complicity. He'd signed off on transfers, including one dated 2 weeks before Amelia's rescue. The door creaked open above. Martha descended the stairs with 2 mugs of steaming coffee. You find what you needed? She asked. More than I wanted, Grant murmured. He slid one photo toward her. It showed a man standing beside Robert Haynes, Detective Brooks, younger, smiling, shaking hands. Martha's eyes darkened. I remember when that foundation came here. They said they were helping rebuild families after the fires. Turns out they were taking the ones who had the least to fight back. Grant's phone buzzed on the table. The message was brief. Meet me at 9 p.m. by the reservoir dock. Bring what you found. Claire. He frowned. Claire rarely used text, especially not cryptic ones. He typed back, Is this secure? No reply. He looked at Ranger, whose ears tilted back. Yeah, Grant muttered. I don't like it either. As the day wore on, he returned to the hospital under the pretense of checking on Amelia. The hall smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweeter, vanilla lotion and peppermint from the pediatric wing. Dr. Claire Rowan was nowhere to be found, but a nurse at the desk told him she'd taken an early leave, citing exhaustion. Instead, Grant found Dr. Michael Abrams, the hospital's night physician. Abrams was in his 40s, tall and stooped from years of bending over charts, his thinning blonde hair always sticking up like static. His personality was mild but cautious, the kind of man who noticed details and didn't like conflict. She left a note for you, Abrams said, handing him an envelope. The handwriting wasn't Claire's. It was too angular, too deliberate. Inside was a folded slip of paper that read, Come alone, or the girl disappears. Grant's jaw tightened. It wasn't Claire. It was bait. He turned sharply toward the exit. Ranger padded after him, nails clicking on the tile. They reached the parking lot just as twilight fell, painting the sky in bruised shades of violet and ash. The reservoir sat 15 miles north, a frozen expanse surrounded by pine-covered cliffs. If the message sender thought he'd come alone, they didn't know Grant Mercer. He drove in silence, headlights carving tunnels through the dark. Ranger watched the road ahead, alert and silent, every muscle taut. When they reached the dock, the lake was half frozen, reflecting the thin sliver of moon like a cracked mirror. No sign of Claire or anyone. Then a sound, footsteps crunching over ice. A man emerged from behind a cluster of boats, bundled in a parka, face hidden beneath a hood. Put the gun down, Mercer, the voice said. Familiar. Cold. Grant stepped forward, his own weapon raised. Brooks. The man lowered his hood, revealing Eric Brooks, his once friendly features now carved into something hard and regretful. You shouldn't have gone to Hollow Ridge. And you shouldn't have been signing those files, Grant said. Where's Claire? Brooks exhaled, smoke curling from his breath. She's safe, for now, but Haynes knows you've got the evidence. He's cleaning house. Grant took a step closer. Then help me stop him. You don't get it, Brooks snapped. You think this is about one man? There's a network, politicians, cops, foster agencies, all feeding from the same stream. Haynes is just the face. You bring him down, and someone worse steps up. I don't care who steps up, Grant said. The kids deserve justice. Brooks hesitated, his shoulders slumped. You sound like I used to. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. This has the ledger, the one Haynes doesn't want anyone to see. Take it. But don't ever come near me again. Grant accepted it cautiously. Why help me now? Brooks looked past him toward the frozen lake. Because one of those kids was mine. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. They took her when my wife died, said it was temporary. She vanished in a month. Before Grant could respond, headlights flared behind them. Two black SUVs roared down the access road, their beams cutting across the ice. "Go!" Brooks shouted, drawing his weapon. "They followed me!" Gunfire shattered the silence. Bullets tore through the trees, sparks flying off metal. Ranger barked furiously, darting behind a boat. Grant grabbed the flash drive, diving for cover as Brooks fired back. One of the SUVs screeched to a halt, men pouring out. Brooks went down first, hit in the shoulder, spinning into the snow. "Get out of here!" he yelled, blood staining his coat. Grant returned fire, his training automatic, methodical. Ranger lunged at a man who broke through the dock's railing, dragging him down before retreating to Grant's side. The chaos lasted less than a minute, but when the echo of shots finally faded, only the wind remained. Grant crawled to Brooks's side. The detective's breathing was shallow, his eyes glassy. "They'll keep coming," he rasped. "Find Evelyn. She knows the rest." Then his body went still. Grant's hand tightened around the flash drive. He glanced toward the SUVs, one burned, the other empty. Whoever survived had fled. The cold wind carried the faint smell of gasoline and gunpowder. He looked at Ranger. "We're not done yet, boy." They left before dawn, taking the mountain road toward Pine Hollow. The snow fell harder now, erasing their tracks almost instantly. Grant didn't know if Evelyn was alive, or if this flash drive would be enough to expose everything. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever trap had been set at the reservoir, it had failed, because he'd survived it. And now, he had proof. The road to Pine Hollow wound through a valley carved by ice and time. Morning light spilled across the snow, pale gold against the pines, painting the world in stillness. Officer Grant Mercer drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the flash drive Brooks had died for. His knuckles were white against the steering column, his face drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, a promise to the dead. Beside him, Ranger sat alert, his breath fogging the glass, amber eyes fixed ahead, as if he too knew this was the end of their long chase. The mountains rose higher as they approached Pine Hollow. Once a logging town, it had been abandoned decades ago, its skeletal sawmills now silent under frost. Grant parked near an old chapel that leaned like a tired sentinel at the valley's edge. Through the trees, he could see faint smoke. Someone had been there recently. He took a breath, reached for his gun, and stepped into the snow. They moved quietly, Ranger sniffing the air. The smoke led them to a cabin, half hidden beneath frost and vines. Its windows were fogged from inside, the faint orange glow of a fire flickering behind curtains. Grant approached, boots sinking into snow with a muted crunch. He knocked once, no answer. Then a voice, a woman's, soft but wary. "Who's there?" "Grant Mercer," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." Silence stretched before the door creaked open. Evelyn Grace stood framed in the dim light, her face thinner than in the photos, cheekbones sharp, eyes the color of emeralds caught between defiance and exhaustion. Her once dark hair had streaks of silver now, and her coat hung loose around her narrow shoulders. Yet there was strength in the way she held herself, like a candle refusing to die out in the wind. "You shouldn't have come," she said, voice trembling. "I had to," he replied. "Brooks is dead, Haynes knows everything, and your daughter, Amelia, is safe." Evelyn's eyes filled instantly. "Amelia!" She pressed a hand to her mouth, a sound halfway between a sob and a prayer escaping her lips. "You found her?" "She's at Willow Creek Memorial," Grant said. "Under Dr. Rowan's care. She's alive, Evelyn. She's waiting for you." The woman's breath hitched. "I can't see her. Not yet. They're still watching." "Not anymore," Grant said, pulling the flash drive from his pocket. "This is what you hid. Brooks gave his life for it." Evelyn hesitated before stepping closer, her fingers trembling as she took it. "He found it. After all this time." She looked at him. "You don't know what's on this, do you?" "Enough to bury the Haynes Foundation." "It's more than that," she whispered. "It's not just Haynes. The Foundation's been trafficking children through foster care systems, using shell companies, fake adoptions, and medical transfers. Amelia was next. I fled before. They could take her. Grant's jaw tightened. Then we end it now. Evelyn shook her head. You can't expose it alone. You need someone with reach. He thought for a moment. Captain Cole. He's old-fashioned but honest. He'll help. As if on cue, Ranger's ears shot up, a growl rumbling from deep in his chest. Headlights flickered through the trees, slicing through the pale morning fog. 2 vehicles rolled to a stop outside the cabin, black government-issue SUVs. Evelyn froze. They found us! Get to the back, Grant ordered, checking his weapon. He glanced at Ranger. Stay low, boy. The first shot shattered the silence, splintering the window beside him. Glass rained across the floor. Grant fired back through the doorway, hitting one of the approaching men in the leg. Ranger barked sharply, lunging toward the back window, positioning himself between Evelyn and the gunfire. Evelyn grabbed a small satchel from under the bed. Inside was a silver laptop, old but functional. If we can get the drive online, I can upload everything to the public record, she said, fingers shaking as she powered it on. You have a signal out here? There's an emergency tower on the ridge, she said. I used it when I hid the journal. Grant nodded. Then that's our way out. They slipped out through the rear, the forest swallowing them in mist and snow. Bullets cracked behind them, cutting through branches. Evelyn stumbled once but caught herself, clutching the laptop close. Grant returned fire twice, forcing the pursuers to take cover. They climbed higher, toward the ridge where a red beacon blinked faintly through the fog, the old tower Evelyn had mentioned. By the time they reached it, Evelyn's hands were numb, her breath coming in ragged clouds. Grant helped her connect the flash drive, shielding her from the wind. This should send everything to the state servers, she said, typing furiously. Once it's live, they can't erase it. Below them, the sound of engines grew louder. The men were closing in. Hurry, Grant said, eyes scanning the tree line. Ranger paced beside him, tail stiff, a low growl vibrating through his chest. Evelyn hit enter. The screen flashed. Transfer complete. It's done, she whispered. The next moment, headlights broke through the fog, 3 figures emerging with guns raised. One of them was Robert Haynes himself, his expensive coat stark against the snow. He looked older than his photos, but arrogance still clung to him like perfume. His voice was calm, deliberate. You should have stayed quiet, Mercer. Grant aimed his weapon. And you should have stayed out of other people's homes. Haynes smiled. That drive won't save you. We control the networks, the judges, the reports. Not anymore, Evelyn said, stepping forward. Her eyes burned with fury and grief. It's already gone public. For the first time, Haynes's mask faltered. You're lying. Grant's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't have to look. It was the alert ping from the sheriff's office feed. The files had hit the news. Live. Ranger barked sharply as the sound of distant sirens rolled through the valley. Haynes turned toward his men, shouting, but it was too late. The echo of police cruisers grew louder, lights cutting through the mist. He tried to flee, but Grant fired one clean warning shot that sent him sprawling into the snow. Within minutes, Sheriff Nathan Cole's squad cars surrounded the ridge. Officers poured out, weapons drawn. Cole stepped forward, his lined face grim but resolute. Haynes, he said, you're under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking, and about 24 other sins. Haynes glared at Grant. You think this changes anything? There will always be another me. Grant holstered his weapon. Then we'll be here to stop them too. As Haynes was led away, the dawn finally broke through the fog, sunlight spilling across the snow like grace. Evelyn stood motionless, the wind tugging at her coat. Then slowly, she turned toward Grant. Can I see her now? He nodded. Let's bring you home. Later that afternoon, the hospital corridor was quiet, the air warm with the hum of heaters and the soft rhythm of machines. Amelia sat by the window, drawing stars on a piece of paper. When the door opened, she looked up and froze. Her mother stood there, trembling. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Amelia whispered, Mommy? Evelyn crossed the room in 2 steps, dropping to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms. Their sobs mingled, joy, grief, relief, all at once. Ranger watched from the doorway, tail wagging softly. as if he understood this was the ending they'd fought for. Grant stood quietly behind them, his hands in his coat pockets, eyes damp. Claire approached, her voice low. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "We did it." Outside the hospital, snow began to fall again, soft and slow, covering the scars the storm had left behind. Grant walked out into it, Ranger at his side. The valley stretched below, the same as it had always been, but lighter somehow, freer. He looked down at the old badge in his hand, its metal glinting in the sun. "Come on, boy," he said. "Let's go home." Ranger barked once, sharp and joyful, and together they disappeared into the morning light, leaving behind the echoes of redemption and the promise that even in the darkest hollows, there is always a way back to the light. In the end, this story reminds us that even in the coldest winter, God's light never fades. He works through ordinary people, a weary officer, a frightened mother, a loyal dog, to bring healing where there was once loss, and hope where there was once silence. Sometimes the miracles we pray for do not arrive with thunder or light, but through kindness, courage, and faith that refuses to die. As you watch this, remember that no matter how heavy your storm may feel, God is still writing your story with love. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles are real. Leave a comment and tell us what part moved you most, and type Amen to pray for all the children and families who need God's protection today. May His blessings guide you, fill your heart with peace, and may every sunrise remind you that grace is still alive.